This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here in Sydney, Australia, with Chef Neil Perry. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, Jamie, very good.
So tell me what Australian cuisine means to you.
Well, to me, the most important thing I think about it is wonderful fresh ingredients. We're very lucky. Amazing things out of the sea. We grow some beautiful things in the ground, and we have some wonderful meat, chickens, produce to use. And then Australia's a very unique place in that it's very much part of Asia, and so I think our food really reflects the relationship to Asia. So there's a lot of influence, even in non-Asian cooking in Australia. I think you still see the influence of technique and so forth. So I think it's very fresh food, and it's, to me, it's really inspired by all these wonderful Asian flavours that we have.
Now, tell me a little bit about yourself. Was food an important part when you were part of your life when you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. My father really is the reason that I'm doing what I do now. He was a butcher first of all, an avid fisherman, and loved gardening. So we ate all of our vegetables out of the ground that we'd dig up together. We'd pick fruit in summer. We'd fish all the time during holidays and weekends, and so most of the fish that we ate and shellfish he actually caught, and he was a butcher, so we ate great meat. So my whole philosophy, no matter if I'm cooking Chinese, my fine dining or my steakhouse, is really all built around the quality of the ingredients, and he is instrumental in teaching me that at a very young age.
When did you actually start cooking yourself?
Well, I started cooking with him quite early on, 6, 7, 8, and didn't start cooking professionally until I was 25, because I did front of house before that, and sort of wine buying, and ran bars and ran restaurants. So that was actually a really good thing for me, because it taught me a lot about restaurants just as opposed to just the kitchen.
We're in May of 2011 now. What ingredient is really, really shining in this particular season for you?
Well, at the moment, we're really at the crossroads. Like, fruit and vegetables are really changing for us. We have 2 quite distinct seasons, not 4 seasons like Canada. So now we're just getting into the winter and autumn vegetables. So things that sometimes come in other countries in springtime, like we see broad beans now, we see artichokes now, and they'll run right through winter because of our temperate climates around the country. They really excite me. Wonderful things like parsnips, chestnuts, Brussels sprouts. Seafood in Australia, particularly southern waters, is absolutely fat and beautiful now. Great time of year through September to eat seafood. Game season's just started, so pheasants, guinea fowls are starting to really come on. So that's the sort of thing at the moment. Hares around at the moment. So we're getting excited about that sort of autumn, winter stuff.
When you speak about game here, are you speaking about wild game, or is most of that farmed?
No, most of it's farmed except for introduced species like hare and rabbit that are shot wild. But most of the guinea fowl and pigeon and partridge, pheasant is all farmed, unfortunately. We don't have that wonderful rich tradition of Europe and America of farming. But there's some wild mushrooms around at the moment, which are pretty amazing as well.
In North America right now, the dining public are very much aware of the whole issue surrounding sustainability of fish. Now, today I went down to the Sydney fish market and wandered around there, and I have never seen such an amazing array of fish in my life. How is that whole sustainable seafood issue actually developing here? I don't really read too much about it, so I was wondering if you could give me an insight.
Well, it's a reasonably hot topic at the moment. I mean, we've been kind of banging on around it for about 25 years. It's one of the things that's been so important to the whole sourcing program, dealing with individual fishermen, knowing that they're respecting the ocean, and that great fishermen really respect the environment as well as the beautiful fish that they catch. And it's not mutually exclusive that the best fish come to you from people who really look after the sea as well as the fish. But one of the great things in Australia is we are an island. We have a very diverse population of fish that come from tropical, temperate and colder waters. We also, since 1999, have had the Biodiversity Act in Australia that has helped with amateur anglers and also commercial fishermen to try to manage our fish stocks. So we in Australia have been at it pretty much longer than most nations. Australia and New Zealand have really been focused on it. I know in America and North America in the last few years, it's really changed. When you've had things like Pacific halibut and the Atlantic swordfish, almost fished to extinction, and then people have recognised that there are major issues. Northern bluefin, for instance, is under threat. Southern bluefin is not so under threat here. So, the Pacific swordfish is an underfished species. So we look very much in Australia at managing via quota, and then try to educate people to know where their fish come from, and pay a bit more to work with an Australian fisherman who's looking after his fish, and we know that he's working within quota, within government regulations, and that science is being updated yearly. So we really look at sustainability a bit like sort of a bank. So if you put $1 million in the bank and you live off the interest for the rest of your life, you can live happily on that, and that $1 million will keep attracting interest. If you start to use the capital, finally that capital will disappear. You'll have a very nice lifetime or life experience for a short period of time, but not a long period of time. So that's probably the easiest way to explain sustainability, and that's what we're working really hard in Australia at, is making sure that the biomass of the species is intact. We're looking after the capital, and the fishermen are really looking after making sure that they're just living off the interest, not the capital. And that's something that the Northern Hemisphere is having a terrible amount of trouble doing because of all the stakeholders.
In the time that you have been cooking professionally, how have you seen Australian cuisine change, and also the perception of Australian cuisine from the outside?
Well, I think that Australian cuisine really has changed a lot over the last 20 years. I mean, there's been a momentum of chefs getting recognition, and chefs coming from those kitchens, and those kitchens producing more chefs. I mean, the legacy of some of the best Australian chefs is really seen now by how strong the industry is, and people, of course, these days have a lot of travel. There's a lot of stages overseas. There's the communication through the internet. There's avant-garde cuisine as well as traditional. There's a lot of opportunities to learn, and I think Australians have taken that opportunity and, like the rest of the world, sort of soaked up and got as involved as they possibly can in the learning process. And so here Australian cuisine, I think, has evolved in the fact that there's a lot of great chefs, and there's a lot of well-trained chefs, and we're using terrific produce, and people are attempting to, in essence, I suppose, obviously be influenced by the rest of the world and influenced by other Australians, but young chefs are trying to find a platform or a position that suits themselves, that speaks of them and is their interpretation of what Australian food means, is their interpretation of what their food means. I mean, look, what's Australian food? Australian food is food cooked by Australians. We're a new modern culture. We don't have the traditions to be able to sit back and say, oh, it's Peking duck, therefore it must be Chinese, oh, it's beef bourguignon. It's food cooked by Australians, and young Australians and young immigrants to Australia, first generation and Australians, are really learning to, I guess, express themselves and say that this is my food. And that's what's really good about Australia at the moment. There are a lot of really good young chefs and older chefs like myself working towards putting food that's reflective of themselves on the table, and that sort of bodes well for the future.
Sydney appears to be a very fashion-conscious city to me. With that in mind, are there any current fads or trends that you see in restaurants right now?
Well, look, I think fads come and go, and fashion's the same. I mean, you live and you die by the sword. I mean, if you get caught up in fashion without creating your own sense and feel of it, I think that's just a sort of recipe for disaster.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Great to see what Ferran's doing, great to see what Andoni's doing, great to see what Renee's doing, but if someone brings it back here and just does that, it's just so easy to see that it's a copy.
And do you get a lot of them?
Oh, you do. I think you get that in every culture and in every city, and those people are seen through very quickly, not only by the food media, but by the general public. But by people who are inspired by great chefs, of course, that's fantastic. Bringing an idea and making it your own, bringing an idea and working on it, to make it suit the environment that you work in is great. So look, there are always fads and fashions coming and going in Sydney, and yes, there's always the newest thing and so forth, but the really great restaurants like this one you see here has been going for 23 years now. So it's important to have longevity, is to have a commitment to one's belief in oneself, and that's a really important part of longevity.
One last question for you. What does good food mean to you?
Good food means to me great taste. I really love food that speaks of the ingredient and the naturalness of the ingredient and is cooked with love and care. But at the heart of it, it always has life. People talk about umami and the fifth taste. To me, verve or life is the sixth taste. And I can taste it in food. Some food doesn't have it because it's had the life wrung out of it by the chef, or by the fact that it wasn't a great ingredient to start with. But to me, when I taste ingredients that is full of life and nature and it's delicious, it brings all the tastes together, and it's really quite unique. And there are not a lot of chefs in the world that actually can create food like that. So when I meet those chefs, when I eat their food, I rejoice with them in the how wonderful their food tastes.
Well, Chef Parry, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon at Good Food Revolution. We look forward to tasting a little bit of your food at some point in the near future.
Absolutely, great pleasure.
Thank you.